Sure, they'll bring in fun, trendy pieces, but when they're gone, they're gone. See, when it comes to furniture, they believe in fresh appeal and don't repeat themselves often. They are the Artful Lodger, and this is how you want to live. 218 West Market Street, Charlottesville, with free on-site parking available.
The 2013 Daily Progress Reader's Choice Most Popular Radio Show host.
Yes, again.
Joe Thomas in the morning.
3 years in a row now?
On News Talk 107.5 FM and 1260 AM WCHV.
This is a comeback story.
Joining us from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, founder of SAME and one of the great voices for sanity in this world where that is very hard to grasp, especially in our news bite, sound bite, drive-by media culture. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is on the line with us. Dr. Jasser, welcome back to Joe Thomas in the Morning. How are you doing today, sir?
Great. It's good to be with you again, Joe. Thanks.
And I appreciate, having done my show from the Western time zones on several occasions, I can appreciate what 4:42 in the morning must look like to you. But I appreciate you taking some time out with us. AFIdemocracy.org is the website there. I wanted to jump in with a question because you have been a great advocate for the non-Islamist members and the majority of the Muslim community, as we've talked about, but, sort of in the shadows and not getting attention because the Islamists seem to grab all the headlines because they do outrageous things like killing American journalists and posting it to YouTube. Does the behavior of ISIS, certainly flashpointing with the beheading of James Foley, you start to put the imams of Charlottesville and across the country in a position where it's like, listen, at some point they're going to have to take a stand against this, and are we approaching that tipping point in your view?
Gosh, I hope so. It's like what I've been screaming from the rooftops the last 13 years since 9/11, and nobody seems to finally get it, and it continues to be this whack-a-mole program. And even, Time Magazine ran a column from an imam from Princeton who talked about the Quran and how many of us moderate Muslims don't correlate all the militancy that the ISIS folks get. But even that is just such a waste of time from an approach standpoint, because the imams and others, he still didn't get it. He was criticizing ISIS, but didn't say anything about their name, the Islamic State. The gateway drug for this type of vicious militancy, like we saw what happened to James Foley and others, the gateway drug is their name, the Islamic State or political Islam. So you can't just sort of say, well, their problem is just vicious barbarism. No, sort of like saying that, some mild use of drugs has nothing to do with the super violence that happens in the drug world with meth and cocaine. Well, ISIS is the meth and cocaine of a general drug problem, which is political Islam that exists in a majority of the Islamist movement, whether it's the Brotherhood in Egypt, which we saw win an election, or Hamas in Gaza, or Jamaat Islamiyya in Pakistan. These are huge movements that have small tips of the iceberg are the more militants that even the moderate Islamists, if there is such a thing, will reject. But for us Muslims to treat that, we have to separate mosque and state and say that. Let me give you one data point, Joe. There were more Muslims now who joined ISIS in the past year than there are Muslims in the UK's armed forces, in the Royal Armed Forces. There are a little over 500 in the British Armed Forces. We saw the video of the beheading of Jim Foley, was a Brit who did that. Yeah, and ultimately, when you see that, the antithesis to joining ISIS is joining Western military. And when we don't have a narrative in the Muslim community that we should be joining the American military, the British military, to fight ISIS, and that is our duty as Muslims, the narrative is being lost.
Well, what would that narrative sound like? And certainly, I think you and I have shared a lot of this in your work over, as you said, the last 13 years, Dr. Jasser, at the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, has been that narrative of the United States isn't the enemy, it is the savior of the Muslim community, and that, if anything, the Muslim community should be rallying to the defense of the United States, not the assault of it.
Exactly. And, the narrative is that, that's why I chose the title of my book, Battle for the Soul of Islam, is that silence and lack of that the biggest threat to our faith, to freedom, to the evolution towards modernity and democracy for Egyptians, Iraqis, for Syrians, for Saudis, all over the world is for us to counter and defeat the ideas of political Islam or Islamism. And most of the vast majority of not only non-Muslims but Muslim leaders won't even say the word Islamism, and they continue to focus on violence. So until we get away from this violent extremism focus, which really doesn't counter the ideas at all, and begin to recognize that we need a coordinated strategy where the leaders of this strategy would be reformist Muslims that recognize, no different than our founding fathers, that the battle against theocracy is ultimately the battle for human rights, for freedom, for every individual, and will then allow and empower a moderate Islam, allow us to be personal in our relationship with God and get government out of the business of forming Islamic states, and that we have to recognize that this neo-caliphate movement globally is a imminent threat to, I mean, look, the first people that are killed by the Islamists, the radicals, are Muslims. ISIS in northern Iraq killed 20-plus imams before we ever started hearing what they were doing to the Yazidis and others, because we are the biggest threat to their movement.
Well, let me ask you about that, Dr. Jasser, because the last time you were on with us, I got into this discussion with a listener who brought up, the fact that the Muslim, the radical Islamists, are very hardcore on human rights and the lack thereof within their theocracy. And I said, well, if Hasidic Jews and Amish and other very conservative, very traditionalist-based religious beliefs can live happily in the United States, why can't a Muslim community? And they do, to the lion's share. So this idea that there's this that the United States freedoms are antithetical to the Muslim beliefs, I think, is also a straw man put forth by those who want to kind of play patty cake with the Islamists and not call them out for what they are.
Yeah, and Joe, the problem is that it's not, if we are going to begin to engage in the conversation you and I are having now nationally and globally, this is going to have to, I mean, it's funny how Secretary Hagel articulated last week how significant the threat is. He said it's bigger than it's ever been. This is not only a terror group, it's a movement that needs to be addressed. I'm like, wow, finally. And now today, General Dempsey saying, well, it's overblown, there really isn't that much of a threat. So they're backpedaling because they realize to address just threat means that you not only address groups like ISIS, but the entire ideological infrastructure of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which are 56 Muslim-majority countries, that almost every one of them has as their doctrinal constitution the fact that Islam is the religion of the state, that the laws come from Sharia, that those who speak up against the president are equal to speaking against Islam. This pathological, oppressive imposition of Islamic law is at the core of what creates movements like ISIS. I mean, now we're seeing this proposition that somehow we're on the same side as Assad in fighting ISIS, when in fact he is the militancy of Assad's movement is what actually created groups like ISIS, and they are basically on the same side in many ways, even though on the battlefield they're fighting one another because, Assad worked with the Khomeinists, and you see Hezbollah, the radical movements that are supporting Assad. So it's two sides of the same coin, and we have to articulate a policy in which we say that both sides of that coin are our enemy, and the moderates that are being just savaged in the streets of Aleppo and Damascus and elsewhere across the Middle East are the ones we need to stand up for.
Well, and you raise a great issue in this, Zuhdi, is that there is no right side in this issue between Assad and ISIS. Is that the right side is the side of the citizens to say that, hold on a second here, you're killing innocent women and children and winding and you can't have all or one or the other, and maybe we need that third alternative. Hang on one second. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is on with us from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy on Joe Thomas in the Morning. Thank you, John. At 7:53, back to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder for the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, AIFD, democracy.org. Dr. Jasser, I hope your membership grows every time we talk, and each day goes past more and more folks are joining your movement to out this issue. I can't shake the feeling that, in the early 30s, one of the most popular social engagements was to visit with the nationalized socialists especially from Germany, in Hollywood and in New York. A lot of Tony parties and fundraisers were held for the nationalized socialists there, only to find by the end of the 30s, oh my God, what had we been giving money to? Is there a parallel between this where we're finally starting to have that moment of like, oh my God, what have we been giving money to or support to and or comfort to? And can we finally start, you and I, having an honest discussion without being called, haters or racists or, conspiracy theorists?
I think from the foreign policy perspective, you're right, and that I think we're making the link between movements and dictators that we had supported and now sort of what we're seeing come to fruition. I still think there's a major disconnect and a huge element of denial of the fact that even the so-called moderates in the West are not only in ideological denial, but they're feeding this. Again, even the Brits, which are far ahead of us in the discussion. I mean, the Prime Minister, Cameron, has used the term Islamism many times. They've even had 6 months ago a huge discussion in London about the Trojan horse of Islamist movements within the British school system, etc. So they're far ahead of us in being able to discuss this. And even with that, they're saying the biggest threat on American soil right now is probably a British citizen doing an act of terror here rather than an American. So, the bottom line is we still haven't engaged the ideological movement of Islamism, and we're sort of where we were probably in the early 50s in identifying communism as a threat globally.
Well, I hope that we can actually start winding up having this conversation because I think as my life has added years and years to it, more and more frequently I find that these things that come with their own little fancy wrappers come down to the same mundane things. It's, as you mentioned, dictators just looking for the new, hip, cool way to exert power that they have no legitimate right to have over masses of people. And this may be this generation's version of it, where we're really just looking at nothing more sexy than this generation's Castro or Perón, trying to exert this power, and it's just wrapped in a theological raiment, which angers me not because I'm Muslim, but because I wouldn't want a WASP doing this, saying, "Oh, vote for me because I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant," or any other sort of reason, because that's a personal thing. I think when Jefferson wrote "endowed by their creators," I said this earlier this month, that perhaps the most powerful word in modern human history, and certainly in the American culture, is the idea that we didn't dictate which creator we were speaking about. We were making it a personal statement. When Jefferson wrote that, he wrote their creator very intentionally so that whoever was in this country would understand that their God has endowed them with these rights. And it's a conceptual thing that I think people lose sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the Achilles heel of the left and other groups that aren't dealing with this is the recognition that, there's almost a soft bigotry of low expectations when we think that, well, for some reason Arabs and Muslims don't want to have this dialogue about freedom, about liberty, about ultimate equality, and that somehow they must be sentenced to this yin and yang back and forth between dictatorship and theocracy. And I think it's time, long overdue, for America to develop a new foreign policy strategy that's a liberty doctrine that abandons the old strategy where we continue to go back and forth. You saw Egypt go from the Brotherhood. Now we're propping up the military dictatorship again. And we're not giving them and you wonder why our approval on the Arab street is so poor. They're actually trying to understand democracy, and they're coming to the streets. Millions came to protest the Brotherhood, and yet we say, well, okay, fine, you need to have a military dictatorship because the Brotherhood didn't work out well for you, and we want to maintain stability. And yet, openly, we're not saying that, well, we want to see an evolution towards real democracy, and we're empowering their oppressors, which takes us out of the mix when it comes to ideological reform on the ground.
Dr. Jasser, let me grab one phone call on my editorial contributors hotline here, 434-964-1075. Good morning. You're on the air with Joe Thomas in the morning and Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Who's this? Hello? I hear you there, but never mind. Then I guess they didn't want to say anything. Dr. Jasser, I appreciate your visit as always. And where can people learn more? It's AIFD. Democracy. So AIFdemocracy.org is your website. And where can people maybe start up chapters of this here in Central Virginia?
Well, they can contact us at AIFdemocracy.org and begin to engage us with Muslim and non-Muslim supporters in their area. We could be happy to engage with our digital media, and we'd love to. We have university campuses of our Muslim Liberty Project that we'd love to engage with. So please contact us at info@AIFdemocracy.org. They can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Zuhdi, Z-U-H-D-I, Jasser. And
certainly, if we only had a big college around here, hold it, we do. So, one of you kids just moving into UVA, why don't you start up one of these and get this started on the UVA grounds? You'll have fun and frolic, and certainly an ear here on Joe Thomas in the Morning. Dr. Jasser, thank you, sir. God bless, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.